Welcome on Texas Football. I'm Bobby Burton, joined by CJ Vogel. This episode brought to you by our friend Dr. Brett Robin over at the Austin Orthopedic Institute. We'll talk to you a little bit more about him all week long, sponsored by our friends at Duck Camp for college football playoff week as well. Hey, guys, we know that everything is focused or primarily focused on the team right now because of the situation in the national semifinals against Ohio State. But given that Texas just picked up a very big recruiting commitment last night from the portal in Travis Shaw, CJ Vogel and I wanted to talk a little bit about that this afternoon or this around midday here. CJ, I look at this commitment for Travis Shaw, and really it's about constructing the team for 2025 going forward. Texas has 8 defensive tackles they're likely losing this offseason. They signed 3 from the high school ranks. They've now added 2. Cole Brevard out of Purdue, who also is a big 330-pound body, as well as now Travis Shaw out of North Carolina, 335 pounds. Is this kind of the area that Texas had to address? Because obviously myself and Jerry and everybody else seems to think it is, but have they adequately addressed it enough over the nose guard? Or do they still need more guys that are really that bonus sized going into the SEC?
I think over the nose, they've done a good job. I do think so. Again, Cole Brevard, Travis Shaw, both of them pushing 325, 330, right? It's tough to find that caliber size with that amount of snaps and production in the transfer portal to begin with. Of course, you'd still like to see them add a piece or two for this defensive line. I don't think anybody's really questioning that, but the start in which we're seeing this line come together for 2025 is beginning to become a little clearer, right? That picture, the pieces are coming together for the defensive line and Kenny Baker right now. But right now, over the nose specifically, you need that rock, right? We've talked about it. Some of the big goal line stands, you have a rock right there with Bill Norton, right? You can throw Alfred Collins in there at 320 pounds, and he can act as a rock. Someone that's not getting blown off the ball, someone that can push back the line of scrimmage as well. And I think both Brevard and Shaw provide that for you. We'll talk about Shaw coming up, but Bobby, I'm sure you've seen some of his highlights as well. The BGO and that first step or two that he possesses is really impressive for a guy of his size. And I think that's one of the things that drew Texas to him originally, is a guy that didn't start a whole lot for North Carolina. Is, hey, the traits are there. If you need him situationally, he can provide some short distance goal line work for you. And that's exactly where I think Texas needed to go in this portal class for 2025's roster.
He had 330 snaps or so for North Carolina. He was a true rotational player. He was one of their 4 rotational guys at defensive tackle. Who on Texas, give people a sense of how many regular season snaps a Texas defensive tackle had this year by comparison.
I believe Alfred Collins, Vernon Broughton are north of 550 at the moment. They're kind of the two in terms of the leading the way for the Longhorns. And of course, you'll see Jermaine Lollet right around 300, Bill Norton right around 240, something in that range as well. So right in that mix of true rotational piece as well. Of course, Texas has played 16 games or will have played 16 games. So those numbers are a bit inflated as well.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, look, I think my point is he's going to be counted on to be one of the 4 at the very least. Or if they get more and rotate in more, he'll be one of the 6, so to speak. I think at defensive tackle, that's the key piece here. You talk about his ball get off. He was a 5-star prospect coming out of high school. I actually texted with someone that was a member of the North Carolina staff previously, prior to them hiring Bill Belichick. I texted with them this morning. They said that the only reason he has had issues getting going at North Carolina has not been his talent. It's been his health. Right. And his weight. He had a hard time getting his weight under control. He said both of those things got better this year, and they got more out of him this year than they had previous years. So they were pretty positive about this move. And you added on Cole Brevard. How many more defensive tackles do we think they're going to take in the portal right now? Because going into it, I thought maybe 3, but then Sadir Mitchell bolted for LSU, and I thought 4 What are you hearing of late?
I still think Texas will add two. Two more. Yes. So they're at two. I think they add two more. They get to that 4 number. And look, aside from the 2 bodies that they've added, Brevard and Shaw, you have 86 total snaps from the 5 that will be on the roster next year to begin with. Is that enough, right? Alex January, I think we all believe he's going to be a very promising prospect, but we've talked about in the past, offensive line, defensive line, not a place you want to have inexperience or a lot of youth at. And right now, with the way that the roster's set at the moment, you're going to be seeing a lot of the youth. The other thing is, should Travis Shaw or Cole Brevard tweak an ankle, miss some time with a hamstring, well, now that room is back to looking mighty thin. I think 2 is still that market that you're looking at saying, okay, Texas needs to get to 4 out of the portal before moving into spring football and beyond, moving forward for next year's roster.
I want to mention some other things here outside of Shaw that happened over the weekend or transpired over the weekend. Zion and Zachariah Branch, the brothers out of USC, have signed with Georgia. Texas was going to give that a roll, but Zachariah Branch, a wide receiver, Zion Branch, a defensive back, they wanted to play together. Texas just didn't have room in the safety room, we're being told, for Zion Branch, and making it Zachariah kind of a non-starter for Texas, even though they really wanted him from a receiver perspective. Also, Marvin Jones, young man out of the state of Florida, played at Florida State, played at Georgia. This will be his 3rd transfer. He ended up deciding to sign with Oklahoma yesterday. So those 3 guys off the list. But there are others that we're still monitoring right now that we know of. Noah Thomas, the former Texas A&M wide receiver, led the Aggies in touchdown receptions with 8 this year. He's visited Georgia, looking at Miami. We believe Texas and Tennessee might also be involved there, CJ. So that's definitely one to watch. He's a big 6'5", 6'6" wide receiver that can block, but Texas has shown interest in. We'll see whether or not he comes in for an official visit. And then also Terry Webb, a defensive tackle out of Texas State, who's visiting or just visited Auburn. He's a guy that we're hearing that Texas may like as well. What do you make of those 2 prospects at this time for Texas?
Yeah, I'll start with Terry Webb, a really impressive prospect out of Texas State. He was originally out of Kilgore College, still has 2 years of eligibility remaining as well. He's played 850 snaps over the past 2 seasons for Texas State, right? And, he's started about 25 games in the process. So when it comes to experience production, kind of those 2 boxes that we've looked at for Texas in their defensive line hunt, that's definitely the one that checks both boxes there. Really impressive there. And he's more of a pass rush guy from the interior, right? You haven't necessarily seen that a whole lot with Brevard, with Travis Shaw, but how about 25 pressures and 3 sacks in 2024 at Texas State? It's not too bad for a guy that's pushing 315 pounds. And again, just kind of would add to that beef there as well. And then speaking about Noah Thomas, I mean, look, 39 receptions on the year, 575 yards, 8 touchdowns, big play waiting to happen. But more than that, he's a big body, right? Bobby, we've talked about Sark kind of having his own mold of wide receiver. And for the most part, they look like Xavier Worthy, right? About 5'11", 180 pounds, but they can go. Thomas is a little bit different than that. Not necessarily someone that Texas has utilized a whole lot or Sarkisian's utilized a whole lot. But one thing he's very good at, going deep. And when you look at the team next year and some of the weapons that they'll need to surround Arch Manning with, going deep is going to be one of those traits and qualities that they're absolutely going to need to possess to fit that offense and the strength.
Here's one thing I would say, whether it's Noah Thomas, Terry Webb, or whoever Texas is going after in the portal, I don't think they're bringing them in for official visits this week. I think they had Travis Shaw in over the weekend, and now it's time to focus primarily or almost 100% on the Ohio State Buckeyes. Right. So we're not going to hear a ton of recruiting news as it relates to the portal right now until after the game with Ohio State, I believe, where Texas likely will try to bring in some guys next week or over the weekend for official visits. Again, looking forward to the 2025 class or 2025 year. I have some other things I want to talk about here, but first I want to say thank you to our sponsor. That is Dr. Brett Robin at Austin Orthopedic Institute. Dr. Robin, a former Longhorn running back that many remember fondly, knows what it takes to stay in the game, and he's here for athletes of all ages, specializing in musculoskeletal health. Dr. Robin treats joint pain and injuries with a conservative approach first, but also offers advanced surgical options, including arthroscopic procedures, fracture management, and total joint replacements. With convenient offices in Austin, Georgetown, and Killeen, Dr. Robin is accepting new patients now. If you're looking for a top-notch orthopedic specialist, give Dr. Robin a call at 512-856-1000. That's 512-856-1000, and get back to your active lifestyle and doing what you love on and off the field of play. Again, that's Dr. Brett Robin, 512-856-1000, accepting new patients now. All right, I look at the number that Texas at in the portal, CJ, not just the two defensive tackles. They also have a linebacker in Brad Spence. They also have a punter in Jack Bomeister. The question I have now is, we know they're looking at a wide receiver potentially in Noah Thomas. If it's not Noah Thomas, remember, they also looked at Zachariah Branch and Eric Singleton, which are drastically different guys. They're more speed guys. So there might still be a spot for a speed guy and a bigger guy in Noah Thomas. They also looked at Max Clare, who out of Purdue ended up signing with Ohio State. They didn't think he was necessarily the big tight end they were looking for, so they didn't go heavy there. Might they also now be looking for a kicker, given Burt Auburn's struggles? I mentioned this earlier today on Coffee and Football, but CJ, Burt Auburn, 6 of 14 beyond 40 yards this year. That's just not gonna cut it for the Longhorn kicker. Currently 16 of 25 overall. We expect Will Stone possibly to take over to assume place kicking duties for the Longhorns against Ohio State. What are your thoughts about what else Texas needs? We talked about the defensive line, but the other spots, do they need 2 wide receivers? What about kicker? And where else might they find a spot for somebody?
Yeah, I think wide receiver is still a spot that they pursue. Of course, you've seen and heard Texas in on 3 guys that you just mentioned. There's no real reason not to, in the sense that you have some really talented wide receivers coming in. You return a pair, maybe a trio. We'll see what happens there. I have heard that Matthew Golden isn't a for sure departure for the NFL, but after this season, with the way that he's kind of putting up the end of this season statistically, Bobby, it's hard to imagine he doesn't capitalize on that in some regard. But with Wingo, with more returning, you have a good base. Now, can you take that base and elevate it to a level of elite? I think that's where you would see a portal addition come into play there. The question is, and I'll ask you this, we've seen Texas be very peculiar with their wide receiver search in the past, right? A year ago it was rumored that they'd go after Juice Wells. They didn't show too much interest. It was rumored they'd go after CJ Daniels. Didn't show too much interest. Now, both of them ended up in the SEC, but it wasn't until they found their perfect fit that they went out and said, okay, Isaiah Bond, Matthew Golden, we got you guys. We're going to roll with what we've got. So I'll ask you this. Is Texas just waiting to find that perfect guy to go all the way in? Because that's certainly what it feels like to me, and that's what it was whenever Adonai Mitchell entered the portal as well. Then once they find and zero in on their guy, they're not going to lose them at the wide receiver spot.
That's a good point, because I think Texas would have liked to have had Eric Singleton, who ended up at Auburn. But Auburn, I think, was just not going to lose that recruitment. He kind of popped up for Texas, though. Right. He wasn't thought to be going in the portal and somebody that Texas necessarily had identified early. Zachariah Branch is someone that was like that, perhaps because of Sark's familiarity in Southern California and where he came out of. But when it became two for the price of one, so to speak, it was not something that Texas wanted to dip its toes with for the Branch brothers. I do think there's an element of that, CJ. Like they have some preconceived notions of what they want to do, and they also don't want to sit here and just pay the highest dollar for everybody. They want people that come in and be a part of a team, because Texas has a good roster. Right. They're not, they're not. I don't want to say. I want to say this the right way. Texas doesn't have to oversell itself right now. They need to get players in that want to be part of the team, that can ride into the culture as opposed to be a problematic with it. We'll see what that means. We really will, I think, because to your point, I don't know if peculiar or judicious or prudent are better words, right? That they seem to be very exacting in their approach in the portal. We knew going in they needed two big bodies. We knew they needed a punter. We knew they always are going to look to find guys that can rush the passer. Well, guess what? That's their first four guys. Guys that can man the middle, guy that can rush the passer, and a punter. I mean, they're very exacting in that approach. I don't see that changing who or what they are. They're not just going to chase the biggest name at the moment. They're going to go after guys that they think make sense for them, in my opinion. Let me ask you this. On the heels of this, dealing with portal recruiting, Jerry Hamilton has talked about it. The January 25th weekend is going to be the big weekend for the junior day for the class of 2026 already. Whether it's Jalen Lott, for example, the wide receiver and son of James Lott that everybody loves out of Panther Creek up in Frisco, or Toa Katoa or Nick Robinson. There's a bunch of guys set to visit that weekend. You guys have an ongoing list on ontexasfootball.com right now that people can go look at. Is that a pretty powerful statement that you can't really, because this is the way I look at it. Texas can't really have another junior day weekend except for that one. Right. Because they can't have it. They can't plan for it the 18th in case they're still playing. And you have to plan for these well in advance. That's a power move because A&M and Texas Tech and OU and all those other teams, LSU, they can have junior days any day, any weekend in the month of January. Does that make Texas's more sought after? That invite, I guess, is the way to put it for juniors. And what are you hearing when you talk to recruits about that?
Yeah, I think the biggest selling point, to add to that is, Texas kind of playing behind the eight ball when it comes to their recruiting calendar because of their current run. But when you have just one recruiting event, you can also turn around and say, hey, the biggest recruiting tool that Texas has playing for it right now is playing in the Cotton Bowl as a Final Four team in all the country for the second straight year, right? That's one of those recruiting tools that their biggest logo, their brand, everything about them will be on display for the world to see again when they play Ohio State on Friday. So that's going to be, in a way, its own recruiting tool. But to your point of establishing relationships, visiting campus, seeing the city, everything that goes on with these recruiting trips, maybe a bit tougher for Texas, right? That's no secret. Other teams, other coaching staffs are at home preparing for their vacations, etc. Texas is still game planning for their season to stay alive. So yes, absolutely. When they have just one weekend available, it does make things very tight for these recruits to say, okay, if I can't make it that weekend, I don't know when the next time I'm going to be able to make it to campus. But if and when that's the only weekend Texas is able to have recruits on campus, okay, I have to get down there because I want to be a part of a team that's going to be playing for championships, whether it be the Big 12, the SEC, or potentially a national championship. I think that absolutely holds some weight there.
Yeah, it's got to, in my opinion. We don't expect much movement again from the portal over the next 72, 96 hours. We just don't until after this game on Friday is over. The same can be said on high school recruiting, although we believe that some players may be whittling their list currently, like Javian Osborne, the big running back out of Forney that Texas is after. Other news and notes that are coming out in recruiting, we share with you over at ontexasfootball.com. Make sure you get a subscription over there. And CJ and Jerry's on the road today, actually seeing a couple of those players that I just mentioned. All right, CJ, that's going to do it for this portal update. Again, Travis Shaw committing to the Longhorns and feeling a very specific need for the Longhorns. And I want to reiterate, he has signed, not just committed to the University of Texas, which is the same case for all other three portal signees for the Longhorns at this time. I want to say thank you also again to Dr. Britt Robin, who is now accepting new patients. Give him a call, 512-856-1000. That's 512-856-1000. He's accepting new patients in Austin, Georgetown, and Killeen, the former Texas Longhorn running back. Give him a shout. All right, CJ, thanks for talking. We'll have you back for the winning drive with Coach Shipley and Rod Babers this afternoon. We're also going to hear from some offensive players of the Longhorns this afternoon, media availability. That'll include Quinn Ewers and a lot of others, I believe. For CJ Vogel, I'm Bobby Burton. This has been On Texas Football. Welcome.